For those of us who've joined us in Napa before, you know the B2SMB Institute Leaders Forum is special. It's a special location, a special venue, and best of all, special people. We pride ourselves on curating an A-list of attendees, the best and brightest leaders of our $500 billion plus business to small business marketplace. And every day we are adding speakers, workshops, and special events to this intimate forum, all of it highlighting the shared challenges and opportunities in a setting that drives casual and candid exchange. Join us at the 2022 B2SMB Institute Leaders Forum, May 11th and 12th in Napa, California. Tickets are on sale now at b2smbi.com/leadersforum22. Good day, everybody. Dave Walker here again with the B2SMB Institute. And one more of our sessions brought to us by our partners in our Small Business Center of Excellence, our B2SMB Center of Excellence, Accenture. And I have continued to find a treasure trove of resources and subject matter expertise throughout Accenture and their learnings and their interactions with some of the larger players out there in the B2SMB space. I wanted to talk about customer experience. And for those of you attending, you know already that there is a session that is from the practitioner's perspective, what I call the practitioner's perspective, with Joe Pasquaretta of Dun & Bradstreet, Dave Houston from TriNet. And they really do a terrific job of talking about how the customer experience or customer expectations have really changed for small business over the course of the pandemic, and particularly what's the future of small business customer experience. Now I want to get the subject matter experts' perspective, and those subject matter experts are, first of all, Angela Fix from Accenture. Welcome, Angela.
Thanks, Dave. I'm glad to be here.
Glad to have you. And back again, someone who I rely on tremendously, another passionate advocate in the B2SMB space, Stephanie Gorski. Welcome, Stephanie.
Great to be here, Dave. Nice to see you again. You can't get rid of me at this point.
Yeah, don't want to either. Don't have any intentions to. So let's just start with a quick 411 on each of you. Angela, why don't you start kind of who you are, what you do at Accenture, what your background is?
Yeah, happy to. Thanks, Dave. And hey, everyone. Yeah, so I'm Angela Fix. I work with Accenture. I'm a managing director. Been working in this space for quite some time within operations, specializing in supporting and guiding enterprises as they work in the customer service space with SMBs.
Excellent. And Stephanie, how about yourself?
Yeah, hi, everyone. So I'm a managing director in our strategy practice, focused specifically on what do enterprise companies need to do differently to support SMBs. So I'm our global SMB lead throughout Accenture, and I'm partnering with people like Angela to bring improvements, engagement models that look and feel different to the ground to make sure that we are truly supporting SMBs in the best way possible.
Well, let's start there, Stephanie. And this is a question really for both of you. What is small business customer experience? I know that sounds like a silly question, but what is it really, and how does it differ from B2B experience, where many of our brands have kind of birthed their business inside of large enterprise sales and have moved into the small business sector? What's the difference between the two, and what is customer experience for SMBs?
You know, it's a really good question. It's actually a rather complex question. We can get into a lot of different nuances that are happening between actually how enterprises sell to other enterprises and what that model looks like, and then how do they sell to small, medium-sized businesses. We've talked a lot about that front end, me and you, before, around the onboarding, the adoption, the upfront engagement model, and how you actually continue the sales. Well, quite frankly, what we're seeing is the continuation of those sales really matters and depends on that customer experience that happens after that first adoption or that first engagement. So customer support, when we think about SMBs for these enterprise models, is about, okay, how do you give them technical support? How do you give them education? How do you make things accessible at their fingertips to make sure that they're engaging with your product or your service in the best way possible? How do you make sure you're continuing that model and developing that relationship that we know SMBs want and love and feel so really close to? Now, the major concern, and Angela and I have gone back and forth on this, is what we see when it comes to enterprises supporting other enterprises. You have an account manager that sits with you, you know who to call, who to actually dial when you need anything. That doesn't happen for SMBs. They get put into a queue, just like you think about you as a consumer, they get treated in the same way. They get put into a queue, don't know who they're talking to, get shifted around the organization, start getting a model that really doesn't feel, one, because it's not scalable, doesn't feel like it's truly personal. And that relationship is a little bit eroded in that customer support process. So we've been really heavily focused, we as Accenture, over the last number of years of how do we change that customer support model for SMBs. Angela, anything? Yeah, go for it.
I'm sorry, I was just going to segue over to Angela to kind of expand on that and really kind of talk about what do small businesses expect in their customer experience, particularly after the sale?
Yeah, for sure. It's very much all the same things that we would expect as consumers. I mean, I think, there's, as Stephanie mentioned, there's a lot of issues that they could run into. And what I deal with personally is there could be a lot of technical issues, for example, that happen with advertising or, marketing products that they might use from the enterprises. And so, when they run into these issues, the expectation is, I've got a question here, I've got an issue here, I need an answer ASAP. And the thing that's so critical about it is that with consumers, we may not have dollars on the line. It isn't a business that we're running. But for SMBs, this is a business. They've got financials at stake. For a lot of them, it's their livelihood, and it has a personal impact on them. And so if they don't get an answer to their question or an issue resolved right away, this really could impact the success of their business.
So they're coming with I mean, and not saying anything really new here, but they're coming with a high degree of intensity, obviously, behind what their asks are of the customer experience. Are there specific things within the customer experience? Is it all about response time? Is it all about clarity of response? Are there any points of which in that customer service experience they have that are most important to them?
Yeah, I would say there's two really big things. And in my line of work, we focus a lot on the time back to the customer, back to the SMB. So initial response time, total response time. The speed is extremely important. But the other aspect of it too is you sort of can't have speed without the actual resolution there, without the actual answer to the question there. And I kind of use the example of, as an enterprise, you could be as responsive as possible. You could be like, oh, okay, so-and-so's reached out to me. Okay, I'm going to respond. But if you can't get an answer to the question and you're taking weeks and weeks to get a resolution, that's not going to be a very good experience. And then on the other hand, you could try to get their answer, an answer to their question or issue resolved. But if it takes a month to get there, at that point, the business has probably gone somewhere else and has given up. So there's, really, I think those two critical things, just, everything around the time spent, but then also the content of what's being presented back to them.
That's great, Stephanie. Our practitioners that I interviewed earlier spoke. It took me a little bit by surprise. They talked about the component of empathy in customer experience. Are there things like empathy? Are there soft benefits that really need to be injected into that customer experience to make it more effective?
Oh, 100%. So what Angela was just mentioning of like understanding the state of the how impactful this is anytime they're coming with a request. I mean, Dave, this compiles on everything we've been talking about. Small businesses are time poor. They're only going to come to you as an enterprise when they truly need something, right? And they feel like you're going to add some type of value after they've purchased the product. With them being time poor and when they come to you, having empathy on knowing that, one, this is probably impacting their business in a big way. The other things that we've seen is, I kept saying, developing a relationship, continuing that relationship. One of the things that Angela mentioned was, she's mentioning time, she's mentioning resolution. They also want to know that they're spending money with people that they can trust and a company they can trust, and building that relationship with potentially the customers at the other end of the customer support agents at the other end. It's another big deal. So we've talked a lot about how do you keep that consistent, that individual that they reach out to, even if it's hard to scale, how do you keep that consistent so they feel like they're building a trusted relationship with someone on the other end of the phone, so that they can really feel like again, I'm going to say it, trust, that they feel like they can really understand where they're coming from and that they know their business and they're giving them valuable feedback on how to run it better. The piece that this also becomes really interesting on is you and I have talked a lot about advocacy and how many SMBs are buying products or services because they heard from another SMB that this is truly making an impact on their business. If you don't do customer support and service and engagement and experience right, those SMBs aren't going to advocate for your product. And that's actually the number one reason that SMBs purchase with another company is because they've heard it from a friend when they're discovering it. So this all kind of flows downstream of deeply connecting you back to the front end of your sales cycle. So why Angela and I feel like this is such a critical topic is because if this breaks down and you're not really meeting the SMB's needs effectively, you're missing a whole bunch of new sales that you could potentially get.
So I have a question in two parts. Part A of the question is going to go to you, Angela. Part B of the question is going to go to you, Stephanie. So part A of the question is, give me a sense, Angela, of how well the players within the business to small business space, those brands that are selling to small business, how well they're doing.
Yeah, it's a good question, Dave. And what I'm seeing on the ground is that, the intent is there. The intent is definitely there where, enterprises, where businesses want to support their small business customers. They want to provide the support so that they can be successful. I think the challenge is that, when you think about some of these enterprises and the number of SMBs that they support, there's just a wide range of them, and each of these SMBs are unique. And so it's really hard to figure out, a one size fits all solution for everyone. And if you think about just where, SMBs land, for example, on the digital maturity model, and I know, Steph, you talked about this with Dave in quite some length in prior conversations, for example, putting an answer to a question that a lot of businesses might have or might be asking these enterprises on a website, and then thinking that that's going to resolve everyone's issues, that's not one solution that's going to work for everyone. There's some folks where maybe, they want to have that in-person interaction with the business to get the support that they need. So I think that, there's a lot of things that could be done better. I think, focusing on the right, metrics, or how do you measure success in terms of how we're supporting the SMBs. So for example, one of the things that I see a lot in my line of work is, agent helpfulness. So agent helpfulness from, the enterprise's, customer support team. How helpful are they to the customer, and really trying to define what that means and segment that based on the type of business. So definitely a lot of areas for improvement, but the intent is there. It's just really trying to get that really solid model that fits across all the SMBs that enterprises are supporting.
So put a pin in that last one, because that's an absolute, I definitely want to dive deeper on the model and what you've seen works to address the challenge of scale, which is always a challenge with millions of small business customers. Stephanie, my question to you is, what is the value of getting customer experience right now more than ever?
Yeah, so there's multiple different layers of this. And I could do a whole conversation with anyone on this topic. So we've asked, the customer experience has come up as a major topic ever since we first started engaging with SMBs and talking with them. The bottom line is, Dave, over 80% of SMBs want to have a better customer experience or better customer service and support. Now, with where Angela was going with that, there's different models that work too. So 67, when we talk about digitally immature, 67% of them want a person. They want a person to talk to. They want someone to engage with. The more mature, the savvy, 22% of them want someone to engage with. Otherwise, they can do a lot of the items like Angela was mentioning. They can research on their own, or they can look at the articles, figure it out. So one, better customer support, or also improving their, through training or engagement, improving their digital maturity in that model and bringing them along. So one of the things we've talked to a lot of our actual enterprise clients about is actually helping them use the tools for the first time. Could be customer support. And once you get over that first hump, you have a much lower customer support amount that you're spending per SMB if you focus on that first time interaction. So That's one way to cut it. The other one is, again, happy SMBs will promote and engage and advocate for your product tenfold. And so you're seeing a pipeline of 10 more opportunities that come into your actual queue because of those SMBs being happy with your customer support. So and then there's also one more piece of this that we can cut it by: willingness to pay. I've just started really spending quite a bit of time on willingness to pay for customer support, which wasn't something that I was researching in the past. We did it around a couple different device products in the technology space. And we're seeing that SMBs are willing to pay sometimes on these products that are within themselves $200 per person, willingness to pay $30 or $40 more per individual employee that they have to make sure that they have a better customer support experience. So just to make sure that that service on the back end is a better engagement model than they've ever experienced before. So there's a more pull through on sales, better actually sale price that you can include and increase the value of your product plus services attached to it. And then there's just a overall higher customer satisfaction and like usage of your product and adoption that you can start thinking about.
So clearly valuable, Angela, to come back to you on that, what we put the pin in. What are technologies, what are processes that you've discovered kind of along the way of helping your clients create that better small business customer experience? What are some of the things that you found along the way that, you know, this is something that works pretty much for everybody?
Yeah, I think I think that it's not a simple answer in terms of this is the one solution that's going to work for everyone. I think the thing that I really think about all the time is just you know, the amount of, you know, support that is required for SMBs, and how it's not like the questions or the issues that they run into are going to just one particular customer support team that has all of the answers and that can get back to them. Like a lot of times, and I'll use this example, which you know, in my work, I have a lot of opportunities to listen in on phone calls that happen where an SMB owner or someone who's working within the SMB is calling in because they've run into a technical issue, for example, and they're calling into the enterprise. And it's really interesting to listen in on these phone calls because you can really just kind of hear it real time, like just, you know, hear in the voice what the SMB is going through. And what is it that the agent on the other end with the enterprise, how they're supporting them. And then that's really how we kind of determine what's the right approach and how we provide the right level of customer service and support. And this particular example I'll use, you know, kind of ties back to kind of the two pieces that we touched on a little earlier, which is kind of the speed and the response and also being able to resolve an issue. And in this case, this person had an account that was hacked. And when you think about, you know, just what that means, you know, to consumer, you know, for someone like me, if my account was hacked, but I didn't have any financial ties to it, then it's like, okay, that's still not a comfortable situation to be in because there's someone else in my account and I don't know what's happening there now. But for someone that is owning a business and someone has hacked in and they're not quite sure like what's going to happen next to their business, like that's a really unsettling place to be in. And so you can hear, you know, I'm listening to this call, you can hear the worry in his voice and the frustration also because, you know, this wasn't his first time trying to reach out. He had been trying multiple times to call in and finally was able to get a hold of someone, ultimately wasn't able to solve the problem. The issue resolution didn't lie within this agent's team. It actually had to get escalated to another team. And the response back to this SMB was, you know, please be patient. I totally understand that this is frustrating. So the agent did a great job in terms of helpfulness and really trying to show empathy. But the problem is that the issue wasn't resolved and he had to go back and wait for someone else on another team to come back and follow up with him. And, you know, in his mind, it's like, well, I have no clue where this is going. Is it going into oblivion? How long is it going to take? And so I bring that example up because I think that's a good example of where a lot of times I see there's, you know, some disconnects in terms of how we're supporting our customers, how we're supporting our SMBs. And there's a misalignment in just how these different support teams work. And it's almost like we need to take a step back and, you know, enterprises need to get grounded on what does customer support and service, like, what does that ideal state look like? And how do we get all of our support teams to align on like a single process that's going to work? So that ideal state where we can land is that this particular person, in a perfect world, shouldn't have to wait, so many days to try to get someone that he can talk to, learn then that, there's no resolution on that particular day and his account still hacked. Like, in a perfect world, he would reach out first try, and, they would fix it. The hacker would be out of there and he could go on his merry way of managing his business again. So I know that was a very long answer to your question, but, there's just a lot of complexities that I think really just stem up to how do you get that one, process that there's full alignment across the board, and all these teams go and take those processes with them in terms of how to provide the level of customer support and service. But ultimately that strategy needs to be there, and that alignment needs to be there across the support teams.
That was a fascinating answer. That was not a long answer. That was a terrifically rich answer. So I really appreciate it. And I appreciate the example and how many executives actually do listen in on their customer service phone calls and kind of hear that sense of urgency. I mean, I appreciate you saying, and I think it's true. I think the intentions are there. The good intentions are there. Many of them born really in the pandemic of, I want to help. I'm suddenly in a position where I can't sell. So I'm gonna help. I'm gonna support. But now, as we move past the pandemic, it's really okay. Is that intention really going to manifest in the form of different processes, different organizations? Stephanie, I'll lay the next question at your doorstep, which is, what's the role of people and people in their interaction from a brand, all across a brand, with the small business customers in creating a great experience?
I mean, I think I love that you keep turning this into an experience conversation, because that's truly what it is. We've referred to it in the old model of being customer support. I mean, what Angela just articulated so well is that if I go back to everything we are going to say, Dave, from the very beginning, is that SMBs want a one-stop shop to engage with their enterprises in the best way possible and solve their challenges at the end of the day. So if we're thinking that model, the engagement throughout should feel that way. So what Angela's hitting on, of like one common thread of how we think about support, no matter what product I'm engaging with, no matter what point in the pipeline, I feel like I'm going to get my item resolved, critical. So now when I think about what people should play in that, people will have various different roles. The model that I really recommend is that it's a combination of tech and human that brings together the best customer experience. And why that? Because I keep going back to SMBs want to build a relationship and they buy based on trust. So if you're going to build that relationship, it can't just be with technology, and it can't just feel, I mean, I'll even tell you, as a consultant, I get this feedback from, as a managing director who sells work, I'll get this feedback from my client. I am very involved at the beginning of the phases. And then once we get delivery and the item sold, if I disappear, that's a problem. Same thing when it goes to selling an SMB. If you are very involved and very engaged with human engagement models to sell an SMB a piece of work, and then you miss that on the back end, that's going to be a really juxtaposition in mindset. So it's having that continuous thread of experience all the way through that lets the SMB almost choose their own journey. One of the best models I've seen has been where we've set up, and actually Accenture did part of this, we set up a portal for SMBs where SMBs can go in from the first moment that they engage, that they adopted a product, and feel like they have an interaction placed for all their questions, all their support that's specific to them. So to Angela's point, not all SMBs feel, look, they're different. So you can categorize based on AI, ML techniques, the actual details, again, based on firmographic details of that SMB. So everything's in one portal. They also have in that portal an area where they can chat, either chat bot or chat an agent. So they have some type of interaction on basic questions. Then they also have an escalation number that they can use. And then it also says when they recommend using it. So they recommend using it at the beginning or at the end of their experience and their journey. As I mentioned earlier, those that are not as digitally mature want more of that human support, whereas those that are digitally mature want to navigate it themselves. So it's letting SMBs pick what path is best for them based on where they're at. And the piece that I will say that I found very interesting through all of our analysis and all of our discussions with SMBs and everything that Angela and I are doing on the ground, interacting with the SMBs on a daily basis, is the biggest item that SMBs say after poor quality of product, that they'll write a negative review or say negatively about an enterprise or say that they don't want to work with them again, is customer support. So again, only further showing how critical this is to get this right and make sure that in continued engagement model, SMBs feel like they're valued, their money's going to a good place, and they feel like their issues are heard.
Let me ask some specific questions of things that might work. Angela, do user groups or customer support groups where customers actually are helping each other, do those work?
Yeah, I think that there's some level definitely of where, Dave, that does work. And when I think about just some of the folks who I know who own small, medium-sized businesses, a lot of it is them just sort of trying to figure out by word of mouth or trying to figure out like what's the right solution. And I think, to what Steph is saying about how just critical the service and support is from an enterprise that you're partnering with. I think, what is it? The research shows, stuff is that it's 5 to 15% of SMBs will continue to spend more if they trust the enterprises that they're working with. And, I think that's such an important metric to remember of why it's so critical to focus in that area. It's so easy for small, medium-sized businesses to go elsewhere and see what are my peers saying, just to look and see what's being said on the internet in terms of this is a great company to work with. This is where I should invest my money instead. And it just takes one bad customer service experience. When I think about the person I just spoke about who called in about the hacked account, I can imagine, if a couple more days had passed, I was surprised at how patient he was. But, I wouldn't be surprised in the next couple of days if he's like, I wonder what other options are out there where I don't have to deal with this kind of issue anymore. And so, looking to their peers or looking to see what other businesses are doing as solutions and something that's a quick solution. The great thing also about going on the internet is you just, try to search and find answers to your questions or your problems, and the answer is immediate. And that's what, all of us, including SMBs, expect nowadays.
Yeah, and Dave, the only thing I'd add to that too, from like a community perspective, is it depends on the product or the service of like if it works or not. And it also depends on the size of the small, medium-sized business. So as we get more towards that medium-sized business, so it's more of like they actually have their trusted network, not as impactful. They go to their community of what's being done and used versus small on the smaller end. Yes, definitely interesting. The issue that we're running into now, though, is there's a number of these that are uncurated by companies and enterprises that are out there. So that uncurated content is actually causing more frustration because it's not always sharing the right approach or the best one to solve the actual issue of that SMB. So it becomes a lot actually for SMBs to also sift through to find the content that truly matters. So best version is making sure it's tailored to the right segment, making sure that also it's curated content and managed specifically from that enterprise where it can be an open group where they share, but also making sure that it's actually factual and valuable.
So, Steph, let me ask the question of, because you've both very eloquently laid out the need to have, frankly, as much investment and infrastructure and care for that period after the sale as you do before the sale. But correct. I can't think of an organization that has as much payroll in after the sale as they do before the sale. So what's the payoff of making that an investment, Stephanie? And, starting with, are small businesses willing to pay for that? Or are they willing to pay more to get that kind of service and support?
They 100% are. So we're seeing that constantly come up as that willingness to pay is actually showing up in multiple different types of products, not just like actual devices and upfront costs, but actually services too. So we're seeing a willingness to pay. I mean, I mentioned the device earlier. We're seeing a willingness to pay of even 10% more than what they're paying today on top of the product they're purchasing, and to get better customer support, or get a better engagement model, or get also personal interaction with an individual instead of just technology self-service in that model. So absolutely, there's a willingness to pay around this. And a willingness to pay more on the product, but also, Dave, before you jump in, also a willingness to purchase more from that company too. So bundle more products together and be more of a continued stickiness with that company if they get better customer support too as well.
When you guys start a conversation with a potential enterprise client to work with you, what's your diagnostic? What's your intake look like? What are some of the questions, Angela, that you ask of an enterprise as far as evaluating really kind of their customer service focus, their customer experience focus?
Yeah, that's a great question, Dave. I think, we always want to understand what their current state is. What is it that they're currently doing today for support and service? And so that could be, what is the team on the ground today? What's the scope of services that you provide? So what's the type of support? Is it tech support? Are there other areas that you're trying to cover within that service layer? Or do you have 24/7 coverage? Is it, across the globe, or is it just in a particular time zone? What are the metrics that you're using to define success? So how do you really figure out, I spoke earlier about turnaround time, about initial response time, accuracy, quality. These are all of the things that you want to measure to really get a gauge for how well you're addressing these, customer support questions or issues that might come up. But, then really tying it back to the business metrics, ultimately, what are the end goals of the business? What are they trying to accomplish? And making sure that that's aligned. So really doing that assessment of first figuring out, how is this enterprise running? Like, what does their support function look like? And then figuring out, okay, where are their potential gaps and where are there areas for improvement that we can work on and provide support for this company.
Terrific session, guys. Absolutely terrific. And Stephanie, I don't mean to cut you off with a last question, but anything to add to what has been a fantastic conversation?
No, we've had a blast talking about this. I mean, honestly, this is you've kind of hit it through all of your questions. One of the areas that we feel very passionate about pushing enterprises to do better on when we think about SMBs, because it creates a lasting interaction model. And as Angela mentioned, one thing I would add on top of what Angela just walked through as her most checklist is it goes back to guiding principles and values, right? If we can ground on this continued, I think I said this in the last session, it struck me so well, making this world that isn't built for SMBs an SMB world. This is a big piece of it, because it's making the products and the services that you've sold them actually work for them, and work for them consistently to help their business. So if you don't look at it that basic and simple level, and then how do you enable that through that holistic engagement, you're missing it. And it really does drive such a value on the back end. It almost removes all the stress off of sales, because it'll come naturally if you truly support SMBs in the right way. So I'm excited to push this subject and see where we can continue to take this to change the experience post-purchase for SMBs. Awesome.
Angela, I loved your example of eavesdropping on an actual customer service call and the insights that you gained from it. I hope you bring those insights to Napa. As we've talked about, we really want to do a kind of a workshop on customer experience, so that frankly, we can have those conversations around, gee, am I asking the right questions of my organization? And am I really addressing the right things? It's ironic in a way that just as we emphasize in the sales process that the way to close is to just simply ask the small business what they want and need. It really is the same thing after the sale. What do you want and need, and how can we best deliver it?
Yeah, definitely.
So thank you both very much for doing this. It's greatly appreciated. Angela, it's a pleasure.
Yeah,
Thanks
thank you, Dave. Thanks so much. Thanks, Steph. It's been an awesome time.
And Steph, thanks very much for again bringing it. Appreciate
Of course,
it.
always love to.
All righty, take care, guys.